Mother has said that the first assignment that she was given in her preparation for being a messenger in this incarnation was for her to read and study Baird Spalding's books, Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. And I have found that so many of those teachings are reflected in the further teachings of the Ascended Masters of the Great White Brotherhood. Today, I would like to refer to a teaching found in Volume 1, Chapter 13, and relate that to the teaching of our beloved Goddess of Liberty, given in a dictation on April 27, 1969. This lesson takes place with two of the masters of the Far East, with the writer Baird Spalding. They are walking, since this was back in about 1900 or something like that. They didn't have airplanes there, and they didn't have vehicles. They couldn't even use the horses because it was such rough territory. But they had to walk 30 miles to the next chapel, the next temple. They left the one, and they had slept in a shepherd's cabin during the night. And now this is the second day in which they are walking. About 10 o'clock that morning, there came a heavy electric storm, and it looked as if there would be a downpour, but no rain fell. The countries in which we were passing was quite heavily thick, dry grass. The country seems exceptionally dry. The lightning ignited the grass in a number of places, and before we knew it, we were virtually surrounded by a forest fire. In a few moments, this fire was raging like mad and closing in upon us from three sides with the swiftness of an express train. The smoke was settling down in thick clouds, and I became bewildered and panic-stricken. Emma, which was one of the masters, and Jest was the second one, seemed cool and collected, and this reassured me somewhat. They said, there are two ways to escape. One is to try to get to the next creek, where there is water flowing through a deep canyon. If we can reach this canyon, which is about 5 miles away, we can in all probability make ourselves safe until the fire has burned itself out. The other way is to go through the fire with us, if you can trust us to take you through. Isn't that basically a very, very center of, if you don't trust, you don't go anywhere. The first thing you have to do is develop a trust, confidence. He says, instantly, all fear left me, as I realized that these men had proved true in all emergencies. Throwing myself, as it were, wholly upon their protection, I stepped between them, and we proceeded on our way, which seemed to be in the direction of where the fire was raging the most. Then immediately, it seemed as if a great archway opened up before us, and we went on directly through that fire without the least inconvenience, either from smoke or heat or from burning brands strewn along the trail under our feet. There were at least 6 miles of this fire-swept area that we passed through. Can you imagine yourself in this situation? It seemed to me as if we were as calmly walking along that trail as though there were no fire raging around. This went on until we crossed a small stream, and then we were out of the fire. While we were going through the fire, Emma, one of the masters, said to me, "Can you not see how easy it is to use God's higher law to replace a lower one when you really need the higher? We have now raised the vibrations of our bodies to a higher vibration than that of the fire. And the fire does not harm us. If senses mortal could see us now, they would think we had disappeared, when in reality, our identity is as if it's always been. In reality, we actually see no difference. It is the concept of the mortal senses that loses contact with us. Could they see us as we are? No doubt they would think we had ascended. In reality, that is what happens. We do ascend to a plane of consciousness where the mortal does not lose contact with us. All can do the same as we are doing. You know, this is a problem. We see something like this and we say, wow, that's way beyond me. Is it? Not if you read these guys, not if you walk with them. Suddenly you're doing the same thing. It's a matter of consciousness. Consciousness. He said, we are using a law given us by the Father to use. We are able to use this law to convey our bodies through any space. This is the law we are using when you see us appear and disappear. And when you read these books, you gather in a room someplace, and all at once the masters are right there. Where'd they come from? They didn't come in the door, they didn't come in the window, they just suddenly were there. And then they would say, goodbye, we'll see you such and such a time. And they just disappear. What are we talking about? We're talking about living energy, being able to control it. This is what you experience when you have happiness, joy. Your energies are going way up in frequency. Or if you get angry, your energies come way down. You begin to understand what we're dealing with here. We simply overcome difficulties by raising our consciousness above them. And in this way, we are able to overcome or come up over all limitation that man in mortal consciousness has placed upon himself. Now, we think this is new stuff, but it's old stuff. Go back into the Old Testament, into one of the stories that we have when we were young kids. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon conquered the Jewish nation. And he drug all of the young men and women and children, drug them all to Babylon out of Jerusalem when Jerusalem fell. There's a story coming out of that. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Now, a cubit is 1.5 feet. So this image he made was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. And he set it up on the plain in Dura in the province of Babylon. He didn't summon the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the advisors and the treasurers and the judges and the magistrates and all other provisional officials to come to the dedication of this image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of this image that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then a herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, lyre, the harp and pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, the lyre, I guess it's lyre, harp, all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, the zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace." Do you remember the story? But there are some Jews. See, the Jews had been in trouble all this time. And there were some Jews pretty dedicated in your kingdom, and you have made them officials. And because you've made them officials, they're not paying any attention to you. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They pay no attention to your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us. from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, that the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to throw them into the fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar suddenly leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They said, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the furnace, the blazing furnace, and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, the governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them at all. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation, language, or say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What a witness! But we see the same thing in the story of the great masters of the Far East. So we have to take a look. It isn't that this is something way out, but it was, but it wasn't. It's something you and I can actually start grabbing a hold of. Going back to the story of Baird Spalding. He said, "To me, it seemed as if we were going over the ground with our feet just touching it." They're in the fire now. They are walking through this forest fire. When we were safe across the stream out of the fire, my first impression was that I had awakened from a deep sleep and had dreamed this, but I gradually awoke to the realization of it all. and the real meaning of it began to dawn upon my consciousness. We found a shady place in the bank of the stream, ate our lunch, rested for an hour, and then walked on to the next village. A higher law, a higher law. Keep that in your mind. Because now I'd like to go to the goddess of liberty's dictation. Her very first sentence: America is more than a nation. She is an ideal, a higher law, a higher understanding of not only the nation itself, but what its purpose and why it is here. From her earliest conception to the present hour, the divine forces have sought to transfer the higher consciousness from the realm of the ideal to the realm of the manifestation. This was done in order that America could exhibit to the world a master radiance after which the family of nations might pattern. So we're dealing with a higher law. And as you and I become more and more in tune with the Christ, becoming that Christ, we need to constantly keep in mind the higher law of everything. Everything we believe, there's a higher law behind it. This is what we are looking for. The Ascended Masters have never been partial in their love of endowing man with, with cosmic grace. The eternal God has desired that a whole family of nations should share jointly in the blessings which he would manifest upon earth. America was a wilderness land. In selecting that land, God sought to produce a miracle framed as a new beginning in order that the beacon of hope might shine forth universal grace to every nation, buoying them up and removing the dust of the ages. You see, Europe had been traveled over and over again in war. The vibrations were there. America hadn't. America was a new start with a new vibration of peace and loyalty and so on. The strength that has been the forte of America has been spiritual. The words "in God we trust," engraven upon the coins of this land, the emblem of the Great Seal of the United States, together with her Constitution and sacred relics, were dedicated as holy talismans to lock the benefits of God intends to bestow upon the world into the hearts of the American people. What does that mean? You know, you can take a talisman, something that means something, and actually enter into. We've had some very, very interesting healings. Some time ago, a doctor and his wife, who was part of the teachings, he called and said, "My wife's pregnant." I think he had already had 4 or 5 children. "My wife is pregnant, but we are told that the baby is developing a cleft palate, which means that the roof of the mouth is not developed right. Sometimes it has with a lip pulled up. He said, what can we do? Can we get some help? I have been reading about Padre Pio. And I had a statue like this of Padre Pio. I knew what Padre Pio could do. Raise the dead. He could do almost anything. When you would go to make a confession with Padre Pio, you don't really want to go there because he'll tell you things you did you don't want to admit. What about this? Well, what about this? Have you know? So I was led in meditation to use Padre. So I took this out to his house and I said to his wife, every morning, I want you to sit down and I want you to hold this image and I want you to talk to him and really make it real. This is not just, no, this is his image. We're going to tune into his image and we're going to talk to him and say, Padre, can you work with us and with us to heal this baby? So this was what she did. Very, very, very beautiful. When the baby was born, we got an email from the doctor. He said, the king has been born perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We had a second situation, almost identical, a few months later. So we did the same thing. The same thing happened. As you identify with the image. This is the reason they're trying to destroy all the statues, the communists, because they got to get rid of these statues, these images that carry with it tremendous power. As people see the statue of George Washington, there's George. Yes, my brother George. You begin to identify with that vibration. You move into that vibration. It's become very, very effective. What would you like to do? What would you like to be? What would you like to produce? Get an image. Begin to work with it. What you create in your mind happens on the physical. When we begin to understand this tremendous truth, you understand what she's talking about. She said, the flame of patriotism that in the past decades made the hearts of the people to beat faster at the sound of martial music and patriot songs have always been a stimulus toward decency, order, and charity. I don't know about you folks, but I was raised in music. I was in the high school marching band. I was in the college marching band, and every Decoration Day we marched, and it was a thrilling experience. Getting away from that now because they don't want us to do that because it's so effective. No, they want you to follow some dirty woman instead of really seeing what's behind all of this. She said, it is easy to see that the legacy of virtue preserved within this great nation by the eternal God for the whole world has become a target of those enemies, the communists and so on, of the enemies of righteousness who would extinguish the eternal flame. But, she says, they do not know that they cannot extinguish the flame, which is non-extinguishable or inextinguishable. But they try. And as they have done to hide it from view, to opaque its glory to the masses of mankind and emerging young souls who come into life without the awareness of their inheritance. The busyness of the age and the chaos it has generated have concealed the truth from youth of the world by means of many clever methods. The dark powers of the land have given voice to violence and discord to arouse the demons in human nature and then to cloak them with the vestments of the church. It is heart-rending when you begin to see that the same stuff that's going on out there has now begun to move into the church. This trafficking of children, this business of women coming dressed whatever, the drag queen shows, the pedophilia, the abortion, the infanticide, the drinking of the blood of the children, of cannibalism, actually sitting down and eating them. This is what you see out there, and it's moving into some of our churches. We've often heard of it happening in the Catholic Church, but when it moved into the Baptist Church and the Mormon Church, it started to bleed within my own heart. What's happening? The living Christ in all of his glorious radiance, standing forth and saying unto the world, excuse me, come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. This is forgotten as men and women under the malefic intent of the very denizens of the netherworld open the doors of the great cathedrals and jazz masses and orgiastic activities. It's sickening, and it's bleeding the soul of America. The educational systems of the world are promoting a godless atheism, which brings forth only partial glimpses of the evolutionary process as though the part were the whole. I mean, the way you read about it in the news and so on, that's the only thing that's happening out there. Only thing that's happening when it's such a few little part of the whole. Mass media have been invoked to report sensationalism and to deny voice to truth. Government, which was instituted to serve the basic needs of man, has been involved in interminable controversy. The forces of safety and protection inherent within the very system and the way of life that constitutes America have had to be invoked against the people whom they should serve. And now the world is asked to witness with rejoicing the downfall of the greatness of the Eternal Father through the founding fathers brought into manifestation to be a cup of light and a blessing to the world. We fan the flames of patriotism this spring. He's talking about now she is, the ascended masters. We fan the flames of allegiance to the eternal nation under God that serves only a world of divine unity, not a world of unity by force or violence. Past history records That whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. We look then for an awakening on the part of the American people. We look to them to repudiate the voices of discord that masquerade as wolves in sheep's clothing and plot the overthrow of a way of life that, while it may need correction in many ways, is still the highest and best that the centuries have produced in modern time. The words, God mend thine every flaw, from America the Beautiful, ought to be accepted by every American as a fiat that is intended to evoke personal and national introspection and a striving toward perfection. The higher law, the higher law, the higher law. Criticism is a disease that does not produce the fruit of rightful striving. It is lawless and destructive in its base intent and drags down the soul of the individual who submits to it. Thus, the admonishment, judge not, lest ye be judged, went forth. And my experience in the Christian church has been one of that sort of thing. So easy for us religious people to criticize other people, even our own people. We stand critically, thinking in terms of how bad somebody is, and not how much they actually are living the life of the Spirit. She says, we are aware of the fact that the godless societies criticize the flaws of those nations that are outside of their fold, whom they would overpower. We see that today about America. And we see that within America, people criticizing America. We understand their methods of boring from within, of hiding behind the legitimate facades and deceiving the people. We urge then, in view of the awful plots that have been hatched to overthrow the forces of freedom in the world, that every lover of freedom will heed our warning in his prayers, in his contacts, and in the renewal of his faith. Folks, we are conquering more what happens at 8 o'clock in the evening or 7 o'clock in the morning than you can possibly imagine. We need to have time to actually go to the Father and work with this stuff. And we're too busy. It takes too much work. It's not convenient. Well, let me tell you something. Something better get convenient pretty quick. Jesus said long ago that they who are whole need not a physician, excuse me, but they that are sick. The sickness of the nations must be healed. The shield of righteousness must be used. The sword of the Spirit must be employed. And every magnificent action that man can take must be taken for the preservation of right values. The proper education of the masses must be accelerated, and the protection of freedom must be carried on to the fullest extent of the law. Armageddon is at hand. We are in it. We are seeing it. We are feeling it. The forces of destruction with their godless philosophy and the sweet spiritual powers of the world to come are locked in deadly embrace. It is never a question of outcome insofar as the power of right is concerned, but the battle can be lost on the realm of the individual, in the militant and vicious individual who, in the name of social justice, can excuse a conduct that tarnishes the image of justice and produces only the fruit of misery, never of order and peace. Knowing, therefore, that the little children who are incoming will be victims of man's dangerous defections from just action, we urge that this activity of light be expanded more and more. A strengthening of the bonds of devotion to the preservation of God's dream for America and the world is in order. For the ascended masters in far-off retreats and far-off worlds are watching as the struggles of mankind go on, hoping and calling forth an avalanche of light to awaken men before it is too late. Understand then, O men of earth, that eternal vigilance is the price that you must pay if you are to preserve liberty upon the earth. Oh, act before it is too late. As a cosmic mother, I speak. Obediently yours I am, the goddess of liberty.